great. Notice the seating, it looks the same. It's totally enclosed, or it once was. You can see it goes in a circle, and then it kind of, the seats kind of go down the way that, because the seat is intruded and torn down, it originally looked like that all the way around, and then up even further. When I lived here in the early 1980s, this was all still underground. When I came back in the early 90s, and started doing trips, it had been completely excavated. I'm going, wow, we used to walk over top of this thing. We didn't know it was here. Josephus says it's here, but where you find it, that's a whole different thing. But 10 years is a big deal for Israeli archaeology. Stuff going on all the time. If you're interested in archaeology, watch some of the videos at Wave Nunley. Facebook, Wave Nunley, YouTube, because we're constantly going over, trying to keep you updated with new discoveries. This was not here. It was underground. Right. It was here. This wasn't visible. So around the edge, you can see the remnants in certain places of original plaster. And this artist reconstruction is what it looked like when it was painted. It was frescoed, meaning fresh. Fresco, fresh. And it was painted when the plaster was fresh before it dried, and then the paint dried into the plaster and preserved it. We'll see it at other places like Masada, where it's very clear, beautifully decorated. It's pre-wallpaper, you got to do something. And he doesn't want this kind of sandstone-y kind of rock showing, so he plastered everything and then painted over that. It's absolutely gorgeous in today. So, as a hippodrome, hippos, hippo, it means horse, and there was a stadium for the racing of chariots. You've seen it in like Ben-Hur, both the modern version and the Kirk Douglas, wasn't it, version back in the 50s or whatever. Right. So you race like this. This is one of the turns, and there's another corresponding at the far end. These were often quite violent, and so over to the side there's a place called an Asclepion, a place where you go to be healed when you're all hurt. This is also a place where there are tons of lots and lots, thousands of martyrdoms that take place after the first revolt and the second revolt. In fact, the last Christian martyr, the Jews and Christians martyred side by side together by Romans. The last Christian martyr was in 309 AD, and the martyr's name was preserved by people like Eusebius of Caesarea, the bishop of Caesarea, Eusebius. His name was Pamphilus. So now you know his name.
And that was here?
Here, in this hippodrome. Eventually, the games, as well as official persecutions of Jews and Christians, were forbidden by Constantine the Great, the first, of course, quote, Christianized Roman emperor. Sometimes I'm convinced, sometimes I'm not, but there it is. So 309, as I recall, and it was February, I believe, just a couple of months ago, February of 309, the martyr Pamphilus gave his life for the faith right here where you stand. So first of all, for chariot races, then for gladiatorial combat, and then eventually for executions. We still have roots here. That's the point.
Wade, I've got a question. When they're excavating this, how do they know where to stop? Like, as far as how deep you go? When is it just like, okay, this is good enough, we're going to let people come in and see it, instead of just digging deeper and deeper and deeper?
It's a problem that has been dealt with in various ways in various places through the time that archaeology has been a science, which is it's a recent science, 100 years, 120 years old, really. Before that, it was just grave robbing, right? Mm-hmm. Indiana Jones kind of stuff. Yeah. And then archaeology comes into its own, begins to develop techniques, methods, and approved and unapproved practices and that sort of thing. But a lot of the areas, a lot of the places that we will visit, Capernaum is an example. Most of the excavation goes down to the Byzantine period, and if it's being done by Roman Catholics, or Greek Orthodox, they stop because that's where they found their origins. Well, we want to go past the Byzantine to another 300-400 years in the past, down to the 1st century, right? And we're able to see some of that, like in Magdala, where it's total 1st century. So typically, if the excavations are being done under the auspices of Roman Catholics, or it's Roman Catholic property or whatever, they like to stop at around the 4th century AD. What we like is when the Jews are in control and they're not interested in the Byzantine period, they're willing to go all the way down to the foundations. So it's always a tough call.
But they stop when they find what they're looking for, basically.
Kinda, sorta, yeah.
Yeah.
The way that they catalog and photograph and keep accurate records and stuff today is really good, because you can take pictures, do some reconstructive work and whatever, and then you can remove that and keep going down into earlier strata levels of occupation.
Well, I should know, but why were they building on top of each other? The sand moved in and covered it up, and then why were they building on top of each other? And leaving what was there before.
Right. Typically, you level off because it's been destroyed. That's why you moved in. Somebody else is not there anymore.
Right.
But there are foundations and there are good building stones and stuff like that. And so you begin to you level off and then you construct.
So you're using the same stuff. You're not
Often
really building
reused.
stuff on top
Right.
of.
Often reused.
completely on top.
The stone that we saw, the pilot stone, the Tiberium inscription, was in secondary use. It was being reused. It was used as a paving stone for part of a gate, I think, over in the theater. It was unreal. I wish we had the whole thing. Yeah.
Who finances a lot of the archaeological processing?
Yeah, this comes from all over. The IAA, or Israel Antiquities Authority, is over all of that and give permits, etc. But then the excavators are really responsible for raising their own funds. And so we know of Scott Stripling, who is doing the Shiloh excavation, who is the one who recently discovered that little tiny tablet. And I've got a video on it. Curse formula from Mount Ebal, which was the Mount of cursing in the book of Joshua, the end of Deuteronomy. He's Assemblies of God ordained, PhD in archaeology. So I guess the moral of that story, we're not all snaggle-toothed and shoeless and stuff like that. And he's a godly, humble guy too, and he's a lot of fun. So at some point, I'm hoping that your paths sort of crosses with Dr. Scott Strickland. So he raises his own funds, and the funds run out, and the excavation goes away. It's a very worthy cause to give to, because every time the shovel goes in the dirt, we're learning more about our spiritual heritage, which I think is important.
So if you're going to excavate something this size, you're not using toothbrushes and trowels, right? What kind of equipment
So,
are you using?
you know, there's a place for a bulldozer, but eventually you're going to get down to the toothbrush and the dentist's pick and stuff like that, the fine work. And that's kind of that's experience speaking. When you hear a metal blade hit solid rock, and this is what often happens, is that there's a pipe that breaks or a road that needs to be widened. You bring in the heavy equipment, but there's always, in Israel, there's always an archaeologist because there's so much material culture, and so they have a trained eye and a trained ear. And when they hear that, they go, okay, everybody stop, back off. They get their brushes and stuff out, and if they find worked stone, they know that this is human activity, and it's time to do an emergency excavation or something. It's the way the bone was found. It's the way the second synagogue in Magdala was found. It's the way the first synagogue at Magdala period. It's the way it was found. Was by leveling off and clearing off land for a proposed Catholic retreat center, and all of a sudden you find the home of Mary Magdalene. Bam! And we get to be there. One of the synagogues that Jesus preached in Galilee.
I understand towns sometimes. Not interesting to them anymore.
We're all pushed away. It's like there's so many people through here. The Ottomans example,
Oh yeah.
really did a good job destroying this country. They were here almost as long as the Romans were span of time. Before them, there were, other Islamic groups like the Mamelukes, so they didn't care that much about what went before. Us moderns are more interested in those kind of things. And a lot of these people, they're trying to protect their family, and they're trying to grow enough food so that no one starves and stuff. They have other, we have leisure to dig in dirt and find stuff.
Basically of no value to them.
Except to steal the stones and use it to build their own stuff. You know?
Islamic destroying things that
There are different mindsets from different people groups and time periods and religious expressions and stuff. And this fell into disuse, and then eventually was covered over, and it's like, so what? No great loss.
England, Scotland.
So did they build something on top of this?
Just dirt in the 1980s.
It
When
just
I walked
filled
across
in.
there. Yeah, just filled in from the sea.
They talk about how most of